Well, this week I read a passage in the Bible that I think is so crazy relevant for all of us, regardless if you're a Christian or not, regardless if you're conservative or, liberal, regardless if you're watching online or, if you're here today in the room. I think this is just so crazy relevant. And here's what I read. Look at this. In Proverbs 28, it says, "But a nation will be strong and endure when it has intelligent, sensible leaders." Now, I thought you guys may clap for that. Maybe you're like, yes, But I think all of us would agree. I think all of us would be like, yes, even if you didn't grow up in church, there may be something inside of you that just went, amen, because that's what we want. I mean, we desire strength and we desire endurance and we want that as a nation for sure, but it goes back and it connects itself to, strong or intelligent and sensible leadership. It hinges on that. And guys, I'm not trying to make any political statements, so make sure you don't hear that as a political statement because we got, a lot of political filters on. It's just the Bible, and I think there's something that comes out of that passage in Proverbs chapter 28 that's not only that a lot of us would just go, yes, but I think there's also something very personal. Because I think that's not only true for our nation and nations in general, but I think it's true for your life. I think it's true for my life. That when there's intelligent and sensible leadership, when that's present in our life, it strengthens our marriages. It strengthens our relationships with our sons and daughters. It strengthens our financial picture. It strengthens our career. It helps our faith endure when that's present. But again, it all hinges on leadership. In fact, that's exactly what a leadership guru by the name of John Maxwell has said. If you're not familiar with John Maxwell, he's a guy that has been around leadership for decades and decades and decades, and he's been around some of the greatest, Fortune 500 CEOs and leaders. He's been around presidents. He's, on Amazon, and in terms of his books, he's written all these best-selling books in terms of leadership. So this guy, his whole life is on leadership, and he basically echoes what Proverbs 28 says. And here's what John says. He says, everything, and I want you to think about this, everything rises and falls on leadership. Everything. The quality of your marriage rises and falls on leadership. The quality of your relationship with your sons and daughters, your career, your faith, the endurance of your faith or the strength of your faith, everything rises and falls on leadership, which means leadership is a really, really big deal. And it actually allows us to engage in and discover things that we so desire to experience in our life. But again, it goes back to leadership. Now, for some of you, you may go, well, Buck, the challenge I have with this, or the thing I would kind of push against this is personally, I just don't view myself as a leader. In fact, I have a few friends who would tell me that, I just don't think of myself as a leader. And I think maybe one of the reasons why you would say you don't view yourself as a leader is because your definition of leadership. And John actually gives us a great and simple definition of leadership. He continues and he says this, leadership, look at this, is influence. And I love this. Nothing more, nothing less. That's leadership. And I think every single one of us here today, every single one of us watching or listening online, we all have influence. You have influence with your friends. You have influence with your mom and dad. You have influence with your son or daughter. You have influence with a boyfriend or girlfriend. You have influence on teams or at school. You have influence with your colleagues or in business. Every single one of us have influence, which means every single one of us are leaders. And here's the coolest thing about influence and leadership, which are synonymous, one and the same, is that all of us can grow in our influence. That's possible. And all of us can take some practical steps and grow in our leadership. And what's so cool about that is because we can all do this, it means that this idea of experiencing strength, as the writer of the Proverbs said, experiencing endurance, experiencing something better in our lives, it's actually achievable. It's possible. Because every single one of us can grow. But the question becomes, well, how? What does that look like for you and for me to actually take some very practical steps and grow in our influence? Well, guys, that's why I'm so excited about this brand new series that we're kicking off today. And we've titled it Brick by Brick. And the reason why is because over the next 4 weeks, we're going to take one brick at a time. And these bricks represent kind of foundational aspects of how do we grow in our influence and how do we grow in our leadership. Because honestly, the reason why I want to talk about this and the reason why I want us collectively to talk about this is because for all of us, I really want us to experience what strength feels like and looks like. I want us to experience that peace that we desire. I want us to experience something better in our lives and something better when it comes to our faith with our Heavenly Father. So over the next 4 weeks, that's what we're going to do. And today, we're going to talk about this brick. And this brick represents something foundational. This brick represents something that in your life provides you motivation. It provides you clarity on what to say yes to and what to say no to. And it provides you the encouragement to overcome like obstacles that'll come your way, things that'll try to get in the way of you growing as an individual or growing in your influence. This is foundational. This is the critical brick. So, what is that brick? Well, to discover that, we're going to check out the letter of Nehemiah. Now, what's cool about the letter of Nehemiah, and this is something you may not know in terms of the Bible, is that out of all 66 letters, the letter of Nehemiah is arguably the greatest leadership letter of all of them. It is packed full of leadership principles. Nehemiah is one of the most intelligent, sensible leaders that you'll read about in the entire Bible. It is fantastic. And so over the next 4 weeks, what's really cool, we're going to spend our time in the letter of Nehemiah, and we're going to pull out some great principles and great things that we can learn from his life. And so today what I want to do is I want to give you a little bit of context because we're going to start at the very beginning of the letter in Nehemiah chapter 1. We're going to kind of give an overview of chapter 1 and chapter 2. And so I want to give you context because this is an ancient document. This is an ancient letter, and providing you context actually makes it make more sense and actually allows the letter to kind of come off the pages and feel like it's more alive. So here's the context. Nehemiah was actually a cupbearer to King Artaxerxes of Persia. And a cupbearer is a pretty big deal. If you're familiar with ancient history, cupbearers are the ones who took the wine and took the food, and they ate it and they drank it, and if it had poison, they croak, not the king. That's the cupbearer. So you would imagine as a king that your cupbearer, you better trust that person, right? I mean, that's the highest level of trust perhaps you have is in the cupbearer. And that's why oftentimes in ancient history, the cupbearers would be the number one advisor to the king. And the cupbearers had incredible influence. So here's Nehemiah, who was an Israelite. Here's Nehemiah, who was Jewish, who was in the Persian Empire and had raised to the ranks of basically the number 2 person in the most powerful empire of the world at that time. He's the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. And Nehemiah, the story of Nehemiah takes place about 444 BC. And that's important for a couple of reasons. The first reason is because in 444 BC, Nehemiah is actually the last chronological or the last historical letter of the Old Testament. And the Old Testament is, before Jesus shows up on the scene, the Old Testament, and this is really important to understand when you read your Bibles, the Old Testament is a covenant between God and exclusively the nation of Israel, the people of Israel. It's a commitment. And that's important because oftentimes we get, we try to interpret it and try to project it on ourselves and all this kind of stuff. The Old Covenant, or the Old Testament, this is important, is between God and in a kind of a proprietary way, if you will, and the people of Israel. And it's all about this idea that God is doing something through the people of Israel to one day do something for the whole world through bringing a Messiah into our world. That's the Old Testament. Well, the last chronological kind of historical letter in the Old Testament before the 400 years of silence, where it's like God turns out the lights and then Jesus shows up after the 400 years of silence, is the letter of Nehemiah. So, if you're interested historically, what's happening before the 400 years of silence? What happened before Jesus showed up on the scene like 400 years later? Read the letter of Nehemiah. Now, the second reason this is important, 444 BC, is because at this point in history, the nation of Israel had not been a sovereign nation for 300 years. And the reason why it had not been a sovereign nation is because 300 years before the life of Nehemiah, the Assyrians came and basically obliterated the nation of Israel, took the sovereignty of the nation of Israel away. And then eventually the Babylonians took over as a world empire, and the Babylonians would do something really distinct. This is kind of cool. When the Babylonians would come in and they would conquer a city, they would take the bold, the beautiful, and the bright, and they would bring them back to Babylon, and they would immerse those individuals in the Babylonian culture in hopes to empower their empire, to make their empire bigger and stronger and more influential. Well, the Babylonians came to Jerusalem, they obliterated the walls, they obliterated and took the articles from the temple, and they also took the Fab Four, from Jerusalem. And if you're kind of a Bible person or familiar with the Old Testament, the Fab Four are Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. That's the Fab Four. So they took them into Babylon, and that's kind of the Babylonian period of time. And then eventually, the Persians take over. And when the Persians take over, something happens very unique. About 100 years before Nehemiah comes in, the Persians have taken over. And Cyrus the Great, who is the king of Persia, he issues an edict that the Israelites or the Jewish people can actually go back to Jerusalem and begin to rebuild their city. And this was a big deal because the people of Israel, I mean, they had been enslaved. They had been, away from Jerusalem. They know Jerusalem, the city, has been, is in shambles. And now Cyrus says, hey, you guys can go back and rebuild because Jerusalem and the people of Israel are no longer a threat to Persia. I mean, Persia is this massive empire. Jerusalem and the people of Israel are like a little bitty dot. And so a lot of the Israelites actually go back to Jerusalem about 100 years before Nehemiah and strive to kind of rebuild the city and rebuild, Jerusalem as this, as the nation of Israel. And so now, at this point in Nehemiah, the nation of Israel is more divided than it's ever been. You have all these, these Jewish Israelites living in Persia and this kind of remnant or these exiles that are in Jerusalem trying to rebuild. And it's been about 100 years. And that brings us up to the life of Nehemiah. So in chapter 1, it all begins with Nehemiah's brother and a group of individuals. They go to Jerusalem. They're trying to check in to go, hey, how's the city going? How's the rebuilding process happening? What's the temple look like? And so Nehemiah's brother comes back and he gives them a full report. And here's what Nehemiah says. It starts this way. And Nehemiah, a lot of Bible scholars would say Nehemiah actually wrote the letter of Nehemiah, so he writes it like a biography. And so this is why it says the way, or it's written the way it's written. And it says this, they said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province, are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. In other words, Nehemiah, we have been to the city, and it is far worse than what you've been told. We look at the gates, and they're destroyed. We look at the walls, and people, the enemies of Israel, can come and go, and they've basically taken advantage. They've enslaved the people of Israel. The economy's in shambles. The fields are in shambles. And Nehemiah, the temple, Solomon's temple, one of the wonders of the world. We looked at it, and it was a skeleton of what Solomon did. And it is a complete disgrace. So Nehemiah gets this news. And how does he respond? Well, he tells us how he responds. He says, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. And do you know why he wept and mourned and fasted and prayed? It's because something happened inside of Nehemiah that happens to great influencers, that's foundational for great leaders, that his heart bumped into his purpose, that his heart smashed into his cause and I believe statements. And what Nehemiah believed is that God is the one true God, the God of Israel, and that the people of God are the nation of Israel at that point in time in history. And that through the people of God, that God's going to do something in the world for the world by bringing a Messiah into the world to once and for all deal with the sin issue between God and the people of the world. That's God's promise. And Nehemiah believed that. That was foundational. But now he just received news that went completely against that, and his heart was crushed. So he did what people do, whose heart is broken because it bumped into their purpose. He said, I'm going to do something about it. And what Nehemiah does is he risks his life. And let me tell you how he risked his life, because this is kind of interesting. He decided he's going to go before King Artaxerxes and he's going to show his heart. In other words, he's going to look downcast. He's going to look sad because his heart's broken. And in ancient history, if you study ancient history, you know that when you would go before like the king of Persia, it was the law that you had to be happy. Like you had to smile all the time and be like, hey, everything's great, everything's awesome. And if you weren't happy before the king, it would cost you your life. That was the law. You always had to be joyful and happy around the king. So he knew that going before King Artaxerxes and being sad or downcast, it could cost him his life. And Nehemiah had never been sad before the king before, but his heart had bumped into his purpose. And so he did it. Went before the king. King Artaxerxes notices this and is kind of shocked and says, Nehemiah, what's going on? What's happening? And Nehemiah responds to the king, and look at this. He says, I was very much afraid. And oh, you better believe Nehemiah was afraid because this could cost him his life. He goes, I was very much afraid. But I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried, it lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Oh, king, these are my ancestors. Oh, king, these are my people. Oh, king, this is my great-great-grandfather, and this is my family. And it's a disgrace. The city of Jerusalem, which is representative of the God of Israel, which I believe, it's a disgrace. And so the king has an option, to kill him or to let him live, because he just broke the law. So what happens? Well, the king said to me, what is it you want? And can you imagine Nehemiah in that moment? He went, oh. I mean, his life was on the line. And the king says to Nehemiah, hey, how can I help? What can I do? And because Nehemiah's heart had bumped into his purpose, it gave him great clarity. It gave him clarity on what he needed to accomplish, what he desired. And so he goes to the king and he says, okay, now that you ask, how can you help? Okay, here's all the supplies, tons of supplies. Here's all the money. It was a ton of money. I need these people because to do what I'm about to do, to kind of reestablish, my ancestors in the city of Jerusalem. And I need a lot of authority because they lived in the city of Susa. Susa is about 800 miles from Jerusalem. Jerusalem is kind of northeast of Susa. And so he's like, hey, there's a lot of enemies of Israel. There's a lot of enemies of the city of Jerusalem that are profiting off the backs of these people. And so if I go, I need some authority. And so the king does everything he asks and gives him authority, gives him supplies, and says to Nehemiah, the only thing I ask of you is that when you get done, come on back because you're valuable. You're important. I trust you with my life. So Nehemiah says, giddy up, I'm going. And he goes to Jerusalem with all the supplies. It takes him about 2 months to get there. And he gets to Jerusalem, and as soon as he approaches the city, his heart breaks again because it's even worse than what his brother had told him. It is in complete shambles. The people are enslaved. The economy is basically non-existent. The morale couldn't get any lower, and the temple is atrocious. And so Nehemiah does what great leaders do. He didn't project on the people. He didn't project his plans on the city. He walked the walls. In essence, if you're in business, he did a SWOT analysis. He looked at the strengths and the weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats. And he said, okay, let me assess the condition of the city. Let me assess the enemies around the city. Let me assess the people of Israel. And then once he spent some time walking the walls, getting objective, he gathered the people of Israel. And he gives an incredible speech of vision. And he starts with purpose. And he says, we believe in the one true God, and you are God's people. And then he gives them what to do, the process forward. And he says to the people, come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we will no longer be a disgrace. And again, if you know ancient history, you know how important it is for these ancient cities to have walls. Walls represent security. Walls represent safety. Walls represent economic growth. Walls represent respect and honor. In ancient history, everybody knew this. And so did Nehemiah. And so he goes, guys, it's time to rebuild these walls. That's going to restart and help us get back on our feet. And then from there, he gives them specific instructions, and he says, here's what we're going to do. The wall in front of your house, that's the piece of wall I want you to start rebuilding. And it was brilliant, because imagine if you lived, in a home, and you had your family, and you saw the piece of the wall, and it's in shambles. I mean, you're going to personally own that more than any other piece of the wall, because it protects your family. And then he said, set up guards, because our enemies are going to try to stop this, because they're profiting off our backs. So make sure you have guards and builders all at the same time. Gives them an elaborate plan. And a great process how to accomplish something great. And the people do it. And keep in mind, the people who were the exiles who went back to Israel or back to Jerusalem under King Cyrus, they had been trying to do this for 100 years. So, what's the result? What happened? Well, here's what happened. So the wall was completed in the 25th of Elul. Now, try to say Elul 3 times real quick, right? That's like if you go to the dentist and your mouth gets all numbed out, you're like, I can't talk, Elul, something. Anyways, that's a Jewish month in a Jewish calendar, and it's August, September. And it says, so the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul. Look at this. In 52 days. They had been trying for 100 years. But an intelligent, sensible leader comes in who knew his purpose and built it in 52 days. That is an incredible man of influence and an incredible leader. So, that's the beginning of Nehemiah. So the question becomes, well, what does that mean for this first brick? Because today I want us to discover this foundational thing. So what I want us to do is, as we think about what we just learned from Nehemiah, I want us to think about a couple observations, specifically 3 observations. Now, there's hundreds of observations we could make in chapter 1 and 2, which we just did a quick overview. But I think there's 3 that are so critical that will be helpful for you, for me, regardless if you're a Christian or not, to move forward. And the 3 observations are this. The first thing that Nehemiah discovered and started with, and he found, was his why. And why is so important because why equals purpose. And as I shared with you guys, he found his purpose. That Nehemiah from the very beginning said, you know what? A purpose, my cause, my belief, this is my purpose. I believe God is the one true God. I believe the people of Israel, the people of God. And I believe that one day God's going to keep his promise he made to Abraham and that a Messiah is going to come into the world through the people of Israel. That is what I believe. That Nehemiah started with purpose, started with his why, which then led to the how. And the how is the process. And the process that Nehemiah did, and that we just talked about, is he risked his life. He said, I understand what I believe. And as a result of my foundation of what I believe, I'm going to go stand before the king, and I'm going to be sad. And I'm going to ask him for all kinds of things. And I have no idea the result, but I'm going to take this massive risk, even if it costs me my life. Why? Because he understood his why. He took the time to get to his why. Which ultimately, the third observation, it led him to the what. And the what equals the result. The result of his leadership is that in 52 days, the wall was built. They had tried for 100 years. Now, guys, these circles right here, why, how, and what, this is nothing new. In fact, there's a gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek who made this same observation. And if you've seen Simon's work or read this book, Start with the Why, it's brilliant. And Simon, in this book, he interviews all these amazing companies and all these amazing leaders that, make a difference. And then he looks at leaders who really don't move the ball down the field or organizations that get stuck and so on. And he begins to compare and contrast. What's the difference? What's the difference? What's the difference? And this is great stuff. And I would highly suggest, reading his book because he goes so much further on the why and the how and the what. It's a great book. But what's so cool is this. He's making observations about modern day leaders today and modern day organizations today. But as you read the book, it's almost like you're reading the letter of Nehemiah. Because everything that Simon says in the book is everything that Nehemiah did. Because Nehemiah was a man of influence and Nehemiah was an incredible and intelligent and sensible leader. So, as you think about that, here's our first brick. The first brick, which is foundational for your leadership and my leadership, for all of us to grow in our influence, is this, is intelligent, sensible leaders find their why. That intelligent, sensible leaders find their why in their relationships. They find their why in their careers. They find their why in their finances. They find their why when it comes to their faith. Because why is what gives you clarity. Why is what gives you insight into what to say yes to and to no to. And why is what gives you clarity on the how. And the how are the action items you take to realize the why, which is your purpose, which is your belief. And guys, here's the implication. And here's what this means for us today. In the last couple minutes, I just want to talk about how do we begin to apply this to our lives. Because I so want us to all take a step And I need you to kind of think about this with me. So think about your life holistically, real quick. Think about your relationships. Think about your finances. Think about your morality. Think about your habits. Think about your career. If you have kids, think about your kids. Think about your legacy. Think about your future. Think about all of that. And here's my question for you. Where are you stuck? Are you stuck in your marriage? Are you stuck with your son or daughter? Are you stuck in a dating relationship? Are you stuck in some sort of a career? Where are there gaps? Is there a gap when it comes, to your finances? Is there a gap when it comes to your faith? Like there's something that's holding you back in your faith. And where do you need leadership? Where's an area of your life that you would identify and say, yep, there's a gap. Yep, I'm a little bit stuck here. And yeah, I definitely need some leadership in this area. And that's hard to admit, but I need you to be honest with me. And then I want you to think about this. I want you to take that, whatever that is in your mind, I want you to hold on to it. And I want you to think about this. I think the reason why many of us get stuck or experience the gaps is because we actually reverse this. We start with the what. We know very little bit about the how. Some of us can give some pragmatic answers here. And very few of us understand the why. For example, maybe you can relate with this because this is something I do from time to time. From time to time, I'll look in the mirror. And as I'm looking in the mirror, I'm like, wow, you look a little bit fluffy today. I'm like, you look a little fluffy here, a little fluffy in the face. I feel fluffy. And so there are times in my life that I go, okay, what am I going to do? What? Well, I want to feel skinny. I want to feel tight. I want to feel healthy. That's what I want. That's the what. And if you were to come to me and you were like, oh, that's great. You understand the what, or in general, you understand the what, you want to get healthy, great. Well, tell me how. Tell me how. Well, I think I'm going to, join a gym and I think I'm going to start eating, better. My diet's going to change and I'm not going to eat as much ice cream. And, okay, great. Why do you want to get healthy? Well, I don't know. Summer's coming up and I want to look good in my bathing suit. Well, that's a want. That's not a why. See, why takes time. Why is critical. And here's what's insightful about the why. You will not get your why until you get outside of you. In other words, you got to go beyond your initial why. So I want to look good in a bathing suit. Great. Why? Why? Oh, I just want to kind of feel healthy. Why? See, it's why. It takes intentionality. It takes work. But once you get to your why, it gives you clarity. And perhaps when it comes to health, a why could be the greatest gift. I believe the greatest gift I can give my family, the greatest gift I can give my organization, the greatest gift I can give myself, so it's outside of you as well, is the healthiest version of me. I believe that. So that's my why. You see, I think a lot of us, we understand the what, a little bit about the how, but we won't do the work of the why, and it creates gaps. So, as you think about that, and think about perhaps an area of your life that you're stuck, there's a gap, or you need leadership, let me ask you an honest question. I want you to be honest with yourself about this question. Here it is, one question. Have you found your why? Have you found your why in your relationship? You want a great marriage? Great. A lot of people do. Why? You want to get physically healthy? Great. Why? You want to have financial, your finances be in order? Why? And remember, the why is beyond you. Once you get to something beyond you, you've done the work and you've discovered the thing that's foundational. Why is a cause? Why is I believe? And guys, I'm telling you, if you do the work, if you're willing to do the why beyond the why, it is so incredibly powerful. I've experienced this in my life in a lot of different areas. There's a lot of areas that I look at, I'm like, man, I want to get better there, and here's the what, here's the what, here's the what. Something in my life that I talk to you guys about quite a bit is in my relationships with Jill, my beautiful wife, and with my boys. I want to have a great relationship with Jill. I want to have a relationship of depth. I want to continue to discover who she is. In fact, one of my big dreams is here's what I want to see, is one day I want to rock on the porch. I want to be really old and wrinkly with her. And I want to look into the eyes of my beautiful wife and see a woman who's been loved her whole life. See a woman who has such contentment and satisfaction in life. I want to see that in her eyes. That's what I want. And when it comes to my boys, I want to discover how to get to their hearts, to build a bridge of trust to their hearts. Because with my sons, each one of them, I want to build that bridge of trust because I know one day perhaps they're going to get married and then they're going to, age in their marriage. And I want to talk to them. I want to provide wisdom on how to age well in your marriage, how to get old, and what the wisdom is in terms of how to get old well. I want to be there for them. And I want to have that bridge of trust. I desire that kind of relationship. And ultimately, my job as their father is to transfer the trust they have to me to their heavenly Father who will never leave them and never forsake them. That is the what. That's what I want. And I think about it and I see it almost every day. So the question becomes, Buck, what's your why? That's great. I think a lot of people may desire that. What's your why? And there's several whys. But the why that I've thought about quite a bit, the why that comes to my mind over and over, is something I foundationally believe. I believe that the legacy of a man is how well he loved his wife and children, period. Not about the accomplishments, not about the successes, not about look at how much money I have, look at all these things I did in business. I mean, look at this, look at my titles, here's all my badges, here's all my accolades and awards. No. Your legacy as a man, I believe my legacy as a man is how well I loved my wife and children. That's foundational. And that begins to provide clarity in the how. The how is the distinctive. The how are the actions that allow you to realize the why. And one of those actions I realized is that, when it comes to work, what I do here, hey, this is a role that I love. This is a role that I embrace the responsibility. This is a role I so desperately ask God every day to help me lead well here. But this is not unique to me. Somebody else will stand on this stage. Somebody else will teach. Somebody else will lead North Point at one day. The most unique role to me is to be the first husband to my wife. The most unique role to me is to be a father to my 5 sons. Why in the world would I ever trade that for something that is so like someone else is eventually going to do? So because I understand the why, it gives me clarity that there are a lot of things I could pursue after hours. There are a lot of things I could do, in addition to my job here. And I could do all these things, and man, wow, look at our church, and look at what's happening in North Point, and look at what's going on in the world. I could say yes to a lot of that, and I am designed and wired for progress and to say yes. But it gives me clarity to say no. No, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to have that extra meeting. No, I'm going to go home at 5 o'clock because my sons are home. And I have a responsibility. I have a why. I believe my legacy will be determined by how well I love my wife and kids. And then the what? The result? Today I feel like Jill and I have a stronger relationship than we've ever had. It's not perfect, and this is not a magic pill. This is important. It's not a magic pill to go like, oh, I found my why, now life's going to be great. No, there's going to be ups and downs, but the reason why you persevere, your motivation to do things perhaps you don't feel like doing, which are going to lead to the results that you desire, is because you spent the time discovering your why. So for you, let me go back to the question. Whatever that is in your life, whatever you would say, there's a gap. I'm stuck. Sometimes we get stuck because we need new information. Maybe this is the information you've been looking for. So let me ask you the question. Have you discovered your why? Have you discovered something beyond you? Have you discovered your cause, your purpose, your belief? I believe this. Because the why gives you clarity and insight into the how, which ultimately gives you the greatest probability to take a step and experience the strength and the endurance you desire in your life. So in your marriage, in your relationships, with your faith, with your finances, in your career, whatever it is, have you discovered your why? Because the bottom line, the first brick, is intelligent, sensible leaders find their why. So this week, go for it. Take a risk. Get in front of your computer. Get on your iPhone, whatever it is. Take the time. Write it down. It will take intentionality. But go discover your why, because it's a step to begin to experience the strength and endurance we all desire. Let me pray for us. Father, thanks so much for this moment that we can have this discussion. And God, I am so crazy grateful that you have preserved the letter of Nehemiah all these years. Here we are today, talking about ancient history that is so remarkably insightful. I mean, you say there's nothing new under the sun. And there are so many things that you have preserved that are helpful for us because you love us. So, Father, I just pray for all of us today. You know, life is tough. There are moments we get stuck. There are things we get stuck in. So would you give us the eyes to see, the hearts to have the passion and the courage to take a step, to find our why, and experience what you have for us. In Jesus' name, amen.